Hey, hello and welcome back to another video from my channel. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate you checking me out and hopefully you'll like this video. This is another bullet journaling video and it is a full review of the Wordsworth and Black notebook. So I did a kind of overall review, a first impressions of a whole bunch of notebooks. That's in my big notebook comparison video, which is quite a while ago now. I will link it in the cards up above for you so you can check that out if you want. That was kind of first impressions, and when I chose this particular notebook to move into for my bullet journal, I finished that one off. I think it was about July maybe, or August. I can't really remember. It's been a couple of months. But I finished that one off and I spent nearly a year working in it. So I thought it was a good opportunity to give you a full review and give you kind of like my actual impressions having used it for a year. So stick around, I hope you enjoy it, and I'll catch you on the other side. So here you go then, here is the notebook. This is the Wordsworth and Black Classic Pro, I think it's called. It's a dot grid, and there are kind of two core versions that Wordsworth and Black make. They make this one, which is the Pro version, which has white paper, and the Classic, which has kind of creamy coloured ivory paper. I think that's the main distinction anyway. It is a hardcover, and it's kind of textured. I think you can probably pick that up in the light. So this is a textured vegan leather cover, or faux leather cover. It has the elasticated closure, it has a pen loop, and then obviously you can see the Wordsworth and Black logo is embossed on the front, and then switching over you can see the brand is also embossed on the back. So that's kind of the outside of it. Let's take you inside. Okay, so as I mentioned, this particular type of notebook, or the style that Wordsworth and Black make, is the Pro, so it has the bright white paper. These are some of my pen tests, so if you've seen the original video, then you'll have seen me do this to begin with. But this is a bright white dot grid, and it's quite a dark dot as well, which can be really useful if you're working in poor light or low light. I find that some of the ones that I've got have kind of lighter dots. It's a bit more difficult to work with them in kind of poor lighting conditions and what have you, which we do actually have a bit of today. It's why the lamp is on over here and you've got this kind of yellowish light, is because actually it's just a really gloomy afternoon, but I wanted to crack on and film this. So then, the pages, you've got 186 pages, they're all numbered, dot grid, and they're 160 GSM. You do have a pocket in the back, and the pocket has this kind of fabric covering, so it makes it nice and durable, nice and tough. And then at the front of the notebook, you've obviously got your first page with your space for contact details. Then you're into the index, and you get 3 pages to the index, and then you're into the notebook. So the first page then, this one is like a blank facing page, so it's not numbered and it's not dot grid, it's not grid. And then you get this kind of single page. So some notebooks will have a kind of double page of dot grid right from the start, and one of the ones that I've got at the moment does do that. That is really helpful, because then if you want to do like a double page spread for your first thing in your notebook, then you can obviously do that, whereas most of the kind of dot grid notebooks tend to have this arrangement where you've got a single page. So the way that I've dealt with that in some of my previous notebooks is use this as like a cover page or stock something in, rather than have it as a functional page. With this notebook, I tried to do it as an actual functional page, and do my grid spacing just on a single page. Now normally, and in the past, I've done this across 2 pages, and actually I hated it on the single page. So that's something to bear in mind, is that obviously when you have a single page arrangement like this, it's not always the easiest thing to kind of get into and to get into you know, from a functional point of view. Sometimes this has to be kind of like a dead page or a quote page or something like that. Which works in a lot of cases. If you're not bothered about using it as a functional page, it's no big deal. I can't remember if I've mentioned it, this notebook did originally have 2 ribbon markers. So you can see that we only have one. That is because the second ribbon marker actually came loose and came out of the notebook, I think within about 2 months of starting to use it. Hence why this one is kind of in a page where I don't really refer to very often. Basically, it just if I just close this up, you can kind of see what's happened here is that there's this little bit of fabric. So this lines the binding of the pages. Basically, you can see what it's supposed to look like at the bottom is that this is supposed to be flush with the pages, whereas this one at the top is obviously sticking up, and you can kind of see that there's sort of glue there. So this was where the second ribbon marker was and where it sort of came away. So that was a bit disappointing. The company does offer a 12-month warranty. So it comes with a little leaflet which kind of gives you a bit of information about the company and their range and the types of things that they do. You can see that there is an option for a warranty. However, the difficulty is if you've started working in a notebook and there's no point in it being replaced. The only thing that would be remotely helpful is if they had been willing to give a refund, which I doubt that that's what it would be. It would probably be a replacement rather than a refund. But it's worth knowing that actually if I'd contacted them, they probably would have replaced the notebook. So yeah, so that's kind of the summary of the inside features, so to speak. I will take you through some of the things that I liked about it and some of the things that I didn't. So the first thing to mention that also is this. You can kind of see here, this is one of the, I forget what it's called, it's like the sets of binding. So the way that the notebooks and books are very often bound is that they kind of come in, I think they're called registers. So you'll get a register of a number of pages. So you can see that this first register that I've got here is actually a bit loose, and the stitching is very prominent. And obviously, when I open it up to the middle of the register, you've got some of this binding thread that's come loose here, and this is particularly loose. This is obviously the first register, so it's the one that potentially takes the most abuse. But it is worth noting that obviously none of these pages are horrendously loose. None of them have come out. The registers that are further into the notebook, obviously the stitching isn't the same as it is at the start. So it probably is purely that this very first section is the one that takes the most abuse. So it's worth bearing that in mind. It's not a huge problem. It certainly didn't bother me. I wasn't worried about this falling apart or anything like that. I do also enjoy the fact that this is a true lay flat, so you can literally flick it open and it doesn't want to close. It truly does lay flat. Even right at the start, you can see that these first pages do lie completely flat and obviously open up. One of the things that I did find, which was an interesting irritation, was that obviously this is a very chunky notebook. So even without having all of these taped edges, you can see that this is quite thick, even right at the binding. Yeah. So when I was working at the start of the notebook, and also obviously when I got towards the end of the notebook, what you get is these pages are bendy, so they flex really badly. And what I ended up doing was having to support this with an old notebook, with a different notebook. So popping a notebook underneath the cover to kind of smooth this out or even it out. It's particularly bothersome if you're doing something like stamping. So like these sorts of things as an example. I think even when I reviewed this, I think I did have to support that so that I could get a clean stamped image. But that's sort of worth bearing in mind that can be a bit of an irritation. That happens with all notebooks. It's just the nature of, because obviously you're at the start and at the end you've got a difference in thickness. But this being a particularly thick notebook, I noticed it a lot more. But it's a good, tough, well-made, or reasonably well-made the ribbon markers notwithstanding, notebook that I did genuinely enjoy using. Another thing I really like about this notebook is, again, having the bright white pages means that these colours really look great on the page. I have done some of the most colourful spreads I've ever done in this notebook, and those colours really do look very impressive. I think that was another fairly colourful one. There was some, there's a fair bit of colour going on there. And so yeah, actually this was, in a lot of respects, makes a very good bullet journal notebook. Some of the issues that I did have with it, and we'll flick back to this one. So some of the issues that I had with it was that actually, despite the fact this is 160 GSM paper, it's uncoated, which means that it absorbs water and absorbs ink very quickly. That's great if you're a left-hander, because it means that if you're writing with your left hand, you're not going to smudge across, or it will dry very quickly. So particularly, especially depending on the type of ink that you're using, some inks obviously always will dry quicker than others. Gel ink is a nightmare. Even for a right-hander, gel ink is a nightmare as far as I'm concerned. But what I did find was, because this is uncoated, the ink soaks in and therefore dries a lot quicker. The downside of it being uncoated pages is that actually it didn't really like very wet media, and also in particular like where you repeat or layer up. So you can kind of see I had a lot of bleed through when I did this header. This is one of the first things that I did where I went a bit nuts with the marker pens, and I was a little bit disappointed, I'm not gonna lie, that this didn't stand up better till layering the marker pens. You can see where there's this very dark colour. This wasn't even particularly heavy-handed, and it bled through on the opposite side. So that was a little bit disappointing. But what I did find is that, having become aware of it, and I managed that through the rest of the notebook, and therefore didn't have as many issues with it from this sort of month onwards. So there's a couple of pages where it's kind of bled through to the next page, but it wasn't a huge irritation. But it was slightly disappointing that obviously I'd ended up having to go really carefully with the marker pens. It was one of the things that I wanted to kind of get away from with the Leuchtturm notebooks that I've used in the past. Another thing that I wanted to mention as well is the feathering. So what I found was, again, I think this is because it's uncoated paper, that where I laid down ink, even when I left it like weeks, when I then wrote over it with a fountain pen, it feathered really badly. So I'm hoping this will focus for me. So this was something where I had written it in, I'd laid down the Tombow ink first, and then I wrote in water plants on the top, and that was a while later. It was probably at least an hour and a half later, so it wasn't as if this was still wet. But what it did, it's almost like it had compromised the integrity of the paper. So you can see that the feathering on this is really bad. And I found that happened over and over again, and that was probably one of my biggest irritations. Let me see if I can find you some more examples of this. It was probably one of my biggest irritations, was that having put down some marker, you can kind of see that I ended up using fine liners over the Tombows quite a bit after that, because it was just such an irritation. I did have a little bit of feathering as well, even where I hadn't laid down ink, which was a bit of a surprise, because Wordsworth and Black are primarily a fountain pen company. They make and sell fountain pens. So it was one of the things that I was really surprised at. So I don't know if you can kind of see, this is one of those where it's sort of feathered ever so slightly, where you reach like the end of a letter, and you tend to, just by the course of stopping, you tend to lay down a little bit more ink than when you're sort of moving across the page, and you can kind of see that this has sort of feathered ever so slightly. So that's obviously not even where I've put down any colour or ink underneath it, it's just done that anyway, which is, like I say, that was a little bit of a surprise. I was expecting, if anything worked well in this notebook, that it would be fountain pens and fountain pen ink, so that was a little bit of a surprise. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about was some of the techniques I did try. So you've seen me do seen examples of like the colouring with the Tombow markers. This month, so this was May, I used quite a bit of like stamping. So there's some stamping, there's some stenciling, and all of this is like distress ink, quite wet media, which stood up really well. I think if I remember rightly, did I stamp it? Yeah, it was all distress ink. So distress ink tends to be quite wet media, and this did handle it really, really well. These are fairly pale colours, but even so, it stood up quite well. One of the things to note though is that where I did do the stenciling, because the page is uncoated and because it soaks up the ink really quickly, it was really difficult to kind of blend and spread any of that ink. This was kind of the first thing that I tried to do, and you can see that I immediately abandoned it because I found that I was getting hard edges and having a really difficult time blending that out. The stenciling was a bit better rather than the kind of reverse stenciling, so this is like using the negative space, the white space. The more traditional types of stenciling did work a little bit better, and as I say, the stamping was very successful. So that's worth bearing in mind as well, is as I say, because it's uncoated, that ink does effectively dry just really quickly, so you can't spread it about and blend it really well. And part of the issue with that is that then you get this is sort of muddied effect, which you can kind of see in the background here, where that ink is just getting sucked in and sucked in and sucked in, and you lose the brilliance of the colour or the brightness of the colour. But absolutely, you can stamp in this. You can stamp in these notebooks really, really well. The other technique that I did was I did do a little bit of watercolour. So this was the second to last month. I think I had this from September to July. So this was my second last month, and I did use watercolour quite heavily in June. Basically, the theme that I followed was based on this washi tape that I bought from London Gifties. You can kind of see, if I flick back, the page has stood up really, really well. There's quite a lot of watercolour that's gone down on here, and the page hasn't wrinkled very much. Obviously, this book's been closed for a little while because I've not been using it, but it actually stood up. It didn't wrinkle that much even right from the get-go, so that's really positive if you want to use watercolour. The other thing to note is that obviously I did have to be really careful using the watercolour to not put down too much water. So you can sort of see here there's been an ever so slight bit of bleeding here. That's just where I inadvertently put down a bit more water than I should have done, and what I did was I was very careful and kept track of it as much as possible to try and make sure that it wasn't bleeding through, but it did happen in a few places. Again, because the paper is really, really absorbent, one of the things that did happen is using watercolours, you can sort of see where it's created this kind of spotty effect. I'm sure that any watercolorists out there that will be able to explain what that's called, because I dare say that it has an actual proper name. But that is also one of the things that happens if you put down quite a lot of water and quite a lot of watercolour media as well. But you can see that I've put down quite a bit of colour here. Again, because the paper is very absorbent, it was quite difficult to get this to blend. I had to adapt the technique ever so slightly to really work quite quickly. So it's worth bearing in mind that you don't get a lot of playtime with the ink or with the watercolour on this paper, because it absorbs and it dries very quickly. But overall it was extremely successful. I even did some brush lettering with an actual brush for the first time, and it came out pretty well. I think it was fairly rough. It's the first time I've tried it, and I'm not very experienced, but you can see it's reasonably neat and tidy. And again, I think that goes back to the fact that the pages absorb the water, absorb the media really well. Something else to note, this particular month I did use gel pens to do these kind of gold spots. The gel ink is the only thing that didn't dry quickly on this paper. It didn't absorb, it tended to sit on the surface, so I had to be really careful with the gel ink. I think there was one of the headers or something like that, it might have been this one, where I went a bit too quickly and closed the page and ended up with some spots that transferred across to the facing page. So it is worth bearing in mind that gel ink probably isn't the smartest media to use on this paper. The last thing to mention, I think, was, so this was where I did some of that test with the watercolor to try and get the technique right and to see how it reacted. And you can kind of see some of these did bleed through, and it wasn't even as if I had a lot of water mixed into those. So overall, I would say that it is a pretty good notebook. It's not going to be something that I will go into again, so I wouldn't buy another Wordsworth and Black notebook, and that's mainly because I was really disappointed that it didn't handle the markers better, and that it didn't handle the fountain pen ink quite as well as I was expecting as well. Other than that, I think that if you're careful with your wet media, if you're careful with watercolors or marker pens, or indeed if you want to do stamping, because I think that this managed that stamping or handled the stamping really well, then this is a great notebook. If I remember rightly as well, it wasn't particularly expensive. It's certainly not in the kind of Archer and Olive range, and the paper is very nice. It's very nice and thick. So that's also worth mentioning. So before I finish off, I wanted to give you the sort of overview of my favourite spreads from this notebook, because like I say, there are quite a few. I'll give you a quick tour. So for September we had the Pigeon Street theme. For October, so this is October last year, I had Pusheen, and it was all kind of Pusheen in spooky costumes and what have you. Then in November we had the Red Pandas theme, because, you know, who doesn't love a red panda. Then we've got my Christmas spreads that I had here. December was pink flamingos, or glittery flamingos I should say. Tropical Christmas. There's a couple of like goal setting pages. January was houses, and this is based on a brilliant bullet journal artist called Barbara Hager. I will link her Instagram account and YouTube account in the description, and so that you can take a look. She does she has a very specific style, and I love her spreads. So this was very heavily based on her work, and I don't want to, like, you know, inadvertently try and take credit for it. It was all inspired by her and her technique, and I really enjoyed it. February was this kind of cozy vibe, warm tones, browns and what have you. Then March, I just did green. Green was the theme for March. Everything was green. It was all different shades and tones, yeah, and that was pretty successful. Then April, Gudetama, and I used stickers very heavily in this theme, so pretty much all of this was stickers. But April was kind of a tough month for me. I didn't do a lot because I had an operation, so I ended up really not using it that much in April. May was basically a colour theme. What I did was I used this washi tape for inspiration, based my colour palette on that, and just used stamps and stencils. Then June we had the watercolour with the pink and gold and purples. And then finally July was basically a kind of summer theme. So I had these stickers from Erin Condren that I got in the summer surprise box, and I used them all the way through this spread, and just based all of the colour palette around those stickers and what have you. So those are all of the spreads that I did, or the themes that I did throughout the bullet journal. I'm going to show you two of my favourites, and I will show you my least favourite. So there's two favourites because I couldn't pick between them, essentially. So the December glittery flamingos, I absolutely adored this. I drew and cut out little stick-on hats. I had these stickers that I'd been gifted. I think I'd been given by a friend at some point in the past, and I thought, I just feel like doing something that's a bit not Christmas, that's different Christmas, and the kind of glittery flamingos really spoke to me. So I had some other stickers and stuff that were in the kind of pink colour palette, and I think it worked really, really well. So one of the things that I particularly enjoyed about how this turned out was drawing these kind of coloured boxes and then sticking the stickers over the top. I think that worked super, super well. You can see I also drew in some little palm trees and stuff. And just, it was such a lovely colour palette. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the fact it was stickers. It made it very easy. You know, December is usually quite a busy month for most of us. And yeah, it just, even looking back over it now, just brings me so much joy. I really, really did enjoy that very, very much. And then, funnily enough, the other one that is an absolute hands down favourite is the January spread. So Barbara Hager is, as I say, I really, really love her work. You know, a lot of these spreads and the designs and stuff are basically her designs. You really should go and check her out because she's a fantastic artist. But yeah, I basically did a kind of stay at home sort of theme. And used her artwork as inspiration. So there's a lot of these little houses that she does, and I just love how it turned out. I very often, when I do these kind of brown sort of colour palettes, or colour palettes that involve brown, it doesn't seem to like work out as well as I expect, or the way that I expect in my head. So, you know, it's kind of like I look back over it and I think, actually I didn't enjoy that colour palette as much as I thought I would. Whereas this one, I absolutely loved it. I think that the brown with the grey and the yellow just kind of made it pop, and so it was a particularly successful colour palette, and I really just enjoyed doing so many of these little doodles and stuff that were based on the way that Barbara Hager draws, and obviously some of her designs as well. I've used kind of elements from some of her designs for inspiration, and I was just genuinely really happy with how it turned out. I would say the ones that are my least favourites are my Gudetama. I really hated how it turned out. I actually found that in the end I didn't really enjoy working with these stickers, and it's such a shame because I love Gudetama. I just didn't want to have to draw him because he's surprisingly difficult to draw. I do really love a yellow though, and the yellow colour palette was fab. It was, however, quite helpful that this was one of the months where I wasn't really doing a lot and wasn't using my bullet journal that much because of it. So yeah, at least I didn't have to suffer it too long. And the other one that I was particularly disappointed with was my red pandas. I think I just I'm not necessarily that good at like drawing and stuff. I think when I hit on something that really appeals to me, that I'm really passionate about, like the house theme, then it's fine. But I think maybe like animals and stuff, I'm just not that kind of artist, and so I actually found it really difficult to like feel enthused about this particular month, which is such a shame because I really love red pandas. But yeah, so there you go. I will turn back to this one again. But that is all that I have for you today. So summing up then, the Wordsworth and Black notebook I think is a very nice notebook. I think that if you're going to do stamping in it, that you'll be fine, as long as you don't want to do loads of that like blending technique. But probably not so good for wet media. You can do watercolor, you can do marker pens, as long as you are a bit careful. There's no ghosting at all in this notebook. The pages are lovely and thick. The dot grid is really nice to work with because it's dark enough. If you don't like a darker dot grid, then perhaps this one isn't for you. The paper color, obviously being bright white, makes those colors really pop and really stand out, which is great. But yes, as a general rule, I think I was disappointed that the ribbon marker came out, that even though this was a relatively tough notebook, and I think I probably would have been fine if I had been, you know, like traveling and taking it around and about, the cover stayed in really good condition, and didn't get marked or scratched or anything, which was great. So I think that it's tough in that respect, but you know, perhaps not quite so well made. If you really abuse these notebooks, I think that they will fall apart, or maybe won't stand up to abuse as well as some other ones do. But overall, not a bad notebook at all. I'm really happy with the time that I've spent in it. I don't regret buying it at all, but I won't get another one, and that's kind of my takeaway. So there you go. I hope that you've enjoyed this run through, this review of Wordsworth and Black. I have more bullet journal videos planned for you. So my next one is, I can't remember what my next one is. Oh, I remember now. Yeah, my next one is a notebook tour. So it's basically all of the planners and notebooks and what have you that I'm currently using in my planning system. And I will talk you through my planning system and what I do electronically versus what I do on paper, and why the different things work for me. So if that sounds like something that you would enjoy, then make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. And obviously, thank you again for joining me. I really appreciate you spending the time with me, taking the time to watch the videos. If you have any thoughts on this notebook, perhaps if you've used it yourself, if you were considering it and you've got any questions, then drop me a comment down below. There have been a few people that have like commented on past videos and stuff, asking for sort of advice and help with notebooks, trying to find really specific products. One of the things that I want to try and do in the future is perhaps try and find some of those really niche products that will help some of you guys out. So if you do have any sort of really niche requests, if you're struggling to find something out there in the internet, then let me know in the comments. And obviously, if you do have questions, I'll be happy to kind of try and help and answer some of those. So again, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!